Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our program, Get to Know. I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Kathleen Antrim.
Thank you, Doug. It is great to be here. We've got an unusual interview today. This is going to be packed with information. We've got a gentleman by the name of David Williams. I believe you write under D.L. Williams. And he's got over 30 years in law enforcement and public safety. He has done everything from investigating violent crimes to mental health liaison, paramedic. You have pretty much covered it all, and you also write books. You're a best-selling author. So welcome to Get to Know. And
thanks.
I want to start by digging back a little bit into your childhood, if I may. And a couple of questions regarding this. And that is, do you feel your childhood contributed to you, A, going into law enforcement, and then B, becoming a writer? Were you an introverted child? Were you an extroverted child? Were you an athlete? Did you read a lot? Tell us about it.
First of all, let's just note that lamp. Love the lamp over your right shoulder there. Lovely.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I don't know. I kind of dig the lamp. So childhood, huh? Okay. Well, I was a preacher's kid, and we were in a little town called Kathleen, Texas, right next to Fort Hood. And my parents opened their doors to all those soldiers going overseas to Vietnam, and they were scared. I think I was 5 or 6 at the time, but I have some vivid memories of that. And so one of the things that I've really reflected on over the years, my first love of reading and eventually my love of writing, was those kids would come in, and I think they were homesick and they were looking for a peaceful place, and that was what my parents provided. And my father always had a big bookshelf. He had a library, and so they would go and they would pick something, and they would sit in this living room area, a lot of couches in there, designed for them to come visit, and they would just read. I mean, we only had like 2 stations back then, and reception was cruddy, and so they, no video games, they read, and that, I believe, was really a big influence on me. Plus, my parents read all the time, and so yeah. Later on, how I got into writing and police work, they both kind of started when I was 13. So I guess still childhood, adolescence, early teenage years, and 2 things happened. One, I picked up a book from my father's bookshelf. It was a hard R. A 13-year-old probably shouldn't have been reading it, but I read it, and it was called Serpico, which was about a cop who, this honest cop in New York City during a time when there was just rampant corruption, and he stood for something. And by the end of that book, I was enthralled. I mean, he was like one of my heroes, and I knew, I made my decision then. I'm going to be a cop someday. I'm going to be an honest cop. And simultaneous to that, like same time period, my father finished his PhD, and he did it on a typewriter. And I think that typewriter was lucky to survive the frustrations of writing that dissertation. And he got done, and he said, "I'm never using that again." Of course he did later, and I said, okay. So I started plunking around. I didn't know how to type yet, but I started plunking 2-finger stories, and they were kind of, derivative graphic novel stuff. And I decided then I'm going to be a writer. And then eventually, as I got a little older and I got into the career, and I got my degrees in literature because of all that. And so I wrote really good police reports, search warrant affidavits, things like that. But it all started to kind of coalesce. I can write about what I do, what I know, and I can, and that's really taken nonfiction forms. I write about victimology and violence prevention and school shooting prevention, and then I write in my prose and my fiction stuff about cases I've worked or influences I've had in the profession, things that people that have left a mark on me that was important. And so it all just has sort of started coming together.
So interesting. So when I look at the Vietnam era and the fact that your parents had basically their home open, which I've done a few tours with the USO, places in the world, in the Middle East, and it seems like soldiers are often really hungry for just a taste of home, just to go somewhere and feel like they are in a home environment, safe environment. It's just amazing to me what an impact that made on you.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see the Serpico, I mean, wow, to give you another direction with law enforcement. So looking at that, when did you then go into law enforcement? And tell us a little bit about your career with that, because you've got, I mean, just an amazing wealth of knowledge and experience.
Yeah, I did a lot. It was a good career. I had a lot of fun. The only thing I never got to do, and I don't have a big regret about it, but I kind of wanted to do canine. Thought that'd be really cool. Never got to do that, but good for the guys to do. But I got to do just about everything else. I applied for the police department in my city. I was living in Austin at the time and grew up there after Kathleen. And so I applied to the police department and they said, you know, you did really well on all the testing. Great. But you come off to us as kind of naive, kind of this young suburban raised, don't really know what's going on with the world kind of thing. Why don't you go away for a couple of years, get some life lessons and come back? And I was devastated. But simultaneously, through some quirky circumstances that would take too long, I was sent by this company I was working, this medical company I was working for, to EMT school. I didn't even know what EMTs were yet. I'd never heard of it. So they sent me to school. I got certified. And at that very same time, as we were finishing our certification, the city of Austin was hiring for EMTs for their EMS. They were opening a new station. They needed a lot of folks really quick. I was not at all qualified, but they hired me anyway. And I thought, okay, this is a way I could get some life lessons, and it was. And it ended up being, over a dozen years. I did that for the city of Austin, and it was great. Became a paramedic. I promoted, and then I became a senior paramedic. I did helicopter rescue for 7 years. I became the senior flight medic on that program called Starflight in Travis County in Central Texas, and having a ball. And then, do y'all remember Waco, the David Koresh thing?
Oh yeah.
So some of those federal officers died out there in the sand, in the dirt, because nobody can get to them. And so there was this nationwide call for SWAT medics, for tactical medics, and they said, if you want to do this, you gotta commit. You gotta go to combat medic school in Fort Hood, and you've got to go to the police academy, because we want you to be able to carry on your own. Their words, we don't want to babysit you on the scenes. And man, I raised my hand like I almost disjointed my shoulder. I raised my hand so fast. And so that's what happened. That's when I finally got into police work. And then I did both for the next 5 or 6 years. And eventually I became a single parent. There was like a lot of time investment with my kids and worth every second, but I needed to choose. And so I went in full-time police work, and I did patrol. I did foot patrol, bike patrol, car patrol. Then I became the mental health liaison for the department. That was very important to me. And then I became a detective in a violent crimes unit, and did that for most of the rest of my career.
Wow. That is quite a career. That's amazing. So you have all this experience in the world out there. EMTs live a life, cops live a life that most people don't understand, because that world is special and different. You see people at their best and at their worst, and some of it's dangerous. How did you then decide? When did you decide, hey, I got this old typewriter and I have stories I want to tell? But when did you decide, okay, I want to be a writer? I mean, not, you're such a slacker. You did nothing your whole life. So when did you decide that you want to be a writer?
I started
life
writing
lesson things.
Yeah, you got the life lesson things down now.
At some point I became less naive, I guess. I don't know. But so I started writing articles for some journals, like the Journal of Emergency Medical Services and some other sort of pre-hospital care directed stuff. And then that blossomed out into articles about violence prevention. Domestic violence prevention became a huge component of my career. And then eventually some of that turned into a couple of books and on those subjects. And then also eventually I decided I think I can write a novel. And so I started doing that. And I got agented in 2019, I think. and that was a good relationship. I like that. She was a great editor. We developed a friendship, and it was awesome. But when the novels I was writing at that time were about kind of autobiographical, they were a single parent. Well, that's me, and I, middle-aged white guy going out and trying to save the day, and it didn't sell. None of it sold. And I've looked at it over these last few years that I can make an excuse and say, well, that's because, cops are so unpopular at that time, 2019, 2020, 2021. And that's true. And that's fair. But really, if we're going to take any responsibility in our craft, we kind of have to say, well, maybe it's me. Is it me? And so I've spent the last 3 or so years just being very introspective, not really doing a lot of querying. I'm starting to do that again, but not really doing that, and really focusing on the craft and getting better, critique groups, lectures, conferences, things like that, and just really focusing on becoming the best writer I can be. And I think that's helped me in a lot of ways and made me better. And it's more honest to say it that way. And so that's kind of where I am. And so in all of that, because of all these different writers groups, every writers group, somebody reaches out and says, hey, can you help me with this passage? Can you make sure I'm doing this cop part right? And I'm happy to do that. I've done that hundreds of times now. And that it has developed into a nonfiction book that's in the beta reader stage. All these questions writers have about authentic police work. By the way, I noticed you had an interview with CJ Box, who's sort of a hero of mine, and it was really fun. I watched some of that, and the guy's just brilliant, and he's prolific, and I want him to trade places with me. No, but I mean, great guy. Well, I'm writing about him next month in an article I'm doing, and not so much in his books, but the series version of his books, which I like very much. I want to be clear on the outset, but different mediums really require sometimes a little bit of fudging on actual police work. And his protagonist in the Game Warden series, I don't think he's ever heard of a search warrant, and so the article is about search warrants and how they apply and how you get one. And so writers will better understand that. And, so I'm not making fun of it. I'm just pointing out, look, this guy didn't, for purposes of television, the series, they've sort of shortened the story and they don't talk about search warrants. And in real life, you need to go get one in a lot of those cases. So, but hey, if you have any dealings with CJ Box, you tell him I said howdy.
Chuck's great. I actually helped him with a book and maybe a couple of his on forensic stuff and dead bodies and tied to a windmill. And I mean, this was it's definitely him. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great writer.
Body tied to a windmill. I've had just about every other kind of body, but I don't think I've had a windmill body yet.
One of the big wind turbines. The body was tied. Yeah. You won't know what it would look like after it had been up there for 12 hours or something like. Okay, we can play with that. That was years ago. That was in one of his earlier books in this series. So you're also now writing an article about helping writers. I mean, I do that medically and forensically, and I've been doing it for 25 years, so I know exactly what you're talking about. You're doing an article now, a recurring article for Clay Stafford in Killer Nashville magazine.
Right.
Yeah. What's that going to be called, and how did that come about?
It's going to be called "Drop the Pen: What Every Writer Should Know About Real Police Work."
Yep.
Drop the pen! Exclamation point! Whatever.
Right.
And then every month it'll be something having to do with sort of the common questions and concerns writers have about how would this work in real life. And I make the point every time. I'm gonna try to make the point every time that, look, you can fudge a little bit. If it's a cozy, of course, you're not going to get into a hard procedure. If it's noir, you probably need to be a little more accurate. If it's police procedural, you better be spot on. And so I want people to have a buffet of choices, but I want them to know what the real choices are. And I think every writer should give back. I mean, every writer should give back something. And this is what I agree. So.
No, that's fantastic. And I have a question. I mean, you've written some really practical books too on preventing school shootings and then also helping someone who you know is in an abusive situation. Talk a little bit about those books for us.
Well, so the school shooting one, oh, look at that. Like you
Yeah.
read my mind. The school shooting one came, that's what I wrote my master's thesis on, how to prevent school shootings. And so I took all the factual data plus my own experiences. I'm one of the few police officers in the nation that has actually dealt with a school shooter after the fact in another violent incident, because so many of them die at the scene. We don't get to have those encounters and those discussions. And so it was a young man, he and his friend had murdered 11 people at their school. But he was adjudicated as a juvenile, which was very controversial at the time, but that's what happened. And so he got out as a young adult and then almost immediately became violent again. And, not a huge surprise, sad, tragic, but not a surprise. And so I caught the case. It was, he had held a gun to his girlfriend's head, and I ended up getting some witness statements. And then the thing was, the big deal was to go find him. And I had my warrant. I finally figured out where I thought he was. It was in a different city. So I made a courtesy call to that agency. It was small to mid-sized agency. And I said, look, and I want to let you know, if you send a guy or two out to back me up, because I'm on my own, I'd appreciate that. This guy has done this. This is who this is. And I swear 90% of the department showed up in tactical gear to back me on that thing. And so, but I got there, and this was a weird call. It wasn't accurate. I don't know where this came from, but the scene commander for that department said, well, it's your warrant, so you're the one that has to knock on the door. And I was wearing my little level 2 vest. I had my pistol on my hip. I had a sport jacket on. And these guys were in tactical gear. And I said, you want me to knock on the door? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I do. I said, all right. So I kind of cringed and I stood off to the side and I knocked on that door. I thought that kid was going to go out in a blaze of glory. I really did. I thought it was going to be a big bad day. But he came out. He didn't say a word. He turned around, put his hands behind his back, never said a word. And that's how.
Wow.
But anyway, that's how that came about. It's important to me. I was relatively briefly a school resource officer, but I was also a watchdog dad at my kids' school. I was doing watchdog dad stuff on 9/11. So that's really important to me, that we keep our kids safe and our teachers safe. And so that's why I researched it. That's why I write it. On the domestic violence stuff, I helped start the first domestic violence investigation unit in Arkansas. And so we would do follow-up investigations on so many cases. And, I'm sure y'all know most violent crime is against women and children. So that's what we did. That's what I was doing. And one of the things that came about, it was difficult for me at first, was why don't these people leave this abusive situation? And of course, I learned over the years, there's a lot of dynamics. There's loyalty and fear and finances and documentation. And, he's got the car keys and the bank statements. And there's just a lot of reasons why people don't leave. And all we can do is support them in finding a safe route out. And when they choose to do that, we need to be ready and not be indignant when they don't leave on our time schedule, right? And so at that time, I was getting lots and lots of calls from friends, employers, coworkers. Hey, I want to help this person, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to. She's saying I'm meddling and sticking my nose in where it doesn't belong, and that's the loyalty component. And so we would just talk about this, and eventually, all those notes and all that advice I tried to give, and if I didn't know the answer, I'd find somebody that did know the answer. That turned into that book, and that's what it's about. It's really focused on not so much the victim, because what I say in that book is, look, if the victim has a copy of this book, that could be like a death warrant for her if the batterer finds that. But if her friend has that book, or her coworker, her boss has some knowledge about how can we help in a substantive way, then we have a better chance working cohesively as a team to get that person out of the danger zone and move on, survive, and then later thrive. And and that's all we can ever ask for.
It
I
seems
think you
like
hit on a critical thing there. I mean, that book would be waving a red flag in front of a bull because this is all about power and control. You
Right.
know that as well as anybody. And it's when you make the move to leave that the greatest danger is because this person's
It is.
losing control of something they don't want to lose control of.
Right.
So I like the way you said to safely remove, safely extract from a situation.
Yep.
It's like a SWAT team going into a house. A lot of bad stuff can go wrong. Here, a lot of bad things can go wrong. That's
Correct.
fantastic.
Absolutely correct. Thank you. Yeah.
and it would seem that a big portion of that would be about the psychological components of this, so that somebody who's trying to help understands, again, as you said, why they're not leaving, just
Right.
the first time something happens.
Right.
So
That's exactly
yeah.
true. One of the seminars I get for writers and professional development for police officers is called trauma-informed interviewing of victims. And so trauma-informed is old in terms of sociological and psychological circles. Those professionals have been dealing with traumatized people more effectively for a long time. It really has only hit policing and investigations maybe in the last 15 years, but it's critically important that we get that right. And so one of the things I talk about and I write about is the fact that in some novels and screenplays, what you have is an officer almost accosting a crime victim, treating them like they're the suspect, interrogating them, and that's really counterproductive and pretty mean. And in medical circles, that would be bad bedside manner, but it's just not effective, and it's not fair, and it doesn't do anything about stopping the violence. It just sort of pushes it to be perpetuated because now this person doesn't trust us because we didn't speak to them in a way that they can understand. And so it's just critically important that we get that right. And I will keep talking about that probably for the rest of my days.
Excellent.
You also have a novel coming that it's coming down the pike. Tell us a little bit about that.
I do. I'm pretty excited about it. It's called Mind the Pony Droppings, a love story. It's a dark comedy about a woman who's been arguing with her dead patriarch for 30 years. And it's really about her. It really stems from those women I used to deal with. And I want to be clear, not every domestic violence situation is a male or female, but a lot of them are, most of them are. And so I just would be so happy. It was like a touchdown moment when those women could finally get out safely and finally put their lives back together. And maybe I'd see them 6 or 12 months down the road and they were doing great. And it was like so gratifying to see that. So this, and I put this in, I really dedicate this book to them, those people, because it's about this woman who her adoptive father was at least emotionally abusive and it's sometimes physically abusive toward her. And it takes her 30 years to forgive him, but also forgive herself. And because that really is sort of this running theme for people who have been in an abusive situation, they can't forgive themselves. They think they hold themselves responsible. And until we let go of that, how are we going to move forward in our lives so she can't. She's got a man who loves her. She can't really love him back yet. She wants to, but she can't. She's had a falling out with her adult daughter, and that is stymied by the fact that she's held back by this ghost. And until she gets there, her life is on hold. And when she finally does, she can clearly move on. So it's comedy. It's dark comedy. And I made that choice stylistically pretty early on, for second draft, I think, because I have lived my career with the mindset that I have to laugh at it because I'm seeing these awful things. And it may be a dark sense of humor, but it is very empowering to be able to laugh in the face of the Satan and of evil and not let him get you down. And so that is really very much a part of this story. It's the other thing that was going on in the city where I was working at that time. There was a carnival that would come, and this whole novel is based in a carnival in an amusement park. And there was a carnival that would winter in my city. And so they'd bring all their cars, their roller coasters and their smash 'em up cars and the rides and for the kids and everything. They put them out in this field on the south part of town, and then those carnies would hit town, and you knew when they hit town, they were a hoot. And some of them were just hysterical. I mean, just the funniest people you ever met. And some of them were really sinister, and they were flying under the radar using that carnival to roll around the country and do awful things. And so that was part of that story too, and how it came to be based in what had once been a carnival, but became an amusement park. And so I think it's fun.
I can't wait to read it.
I can't wait to read it either, and send us all the info, because we will definitely promote the heck out of it when it does happen. And we'd love to have you back around the time that is coming out, maybe a few weeks before, and we'll talk about it in more detail. And
okay, I'll be there. Sure.
Yeah.
So now tell us where people can get your books and find you.
They're on all the book buying sites. My website is davidlanewilliams.com.
Right.
Pretty simple. I go by DL. When I was growing up, I'm David Lane Williams the fourth, and my son is the fifth, because we have no real imagination when it comes to male names, and we just recycle those suckers. But they call me Little David for the first part of my life, and I got to where I would not tolerate that. So then DL started coming up, and I've been called DL off and on kind of all my life. And so when I started, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called Facebook. My sons, like I said, I was a single parent for many years, and my sons wanted a Facebook page. I said, well, okay, what is that? And so I kind of looked into it a little bit. This was early days, and I said, okay, you can have one, but you have to let me be one of your friends, and I have to be able to see what you're doing. Okay. And so they agreed to that. Well, I was a cop, and cops get threatened. I literally had a $500 bounty on my head at one point, which is a little insulting, but I took it seriously. And so I didn't want my name out there. So I just went back with the initials, DL Williams, and that's my Facebook, and that's
a great story.
A pen name.
Yeah, that is a
great story. Yeah.
You're a great storyteller.
Yes.
Good. You're a great interview.
Well, I hope so, man.
We will definitely have to have you back. I'm going to really look forward to that. And thank you so much for being on our show today. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask our viewers to please click the thumbs up if you enjoyed this interview. It helps with the algorithms. And if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming interviews. And again, David, this was great.
It was great. I really appreciate you. This was fun.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for being here. This was very enlightening and a lot of fun. And like I said, we will do it again. Well, that wraps up this episode of Get to Know here on the Outliers YouTube channel. As you know, we'll be back with other interviews and lots of fun. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep having fun, and don't get caught.